There is an ancient story I've always loved. A man who wished to rescue everyone, every wounded bird, every broken soul, walked into a river to save a drowning stranger. But the stranger, terrified and thrashing, clung to him with such ferocity that both of them began to sink. Only then did an old fisherman on the shore shout, "If you try to save a drowning man by letting him hold on to you, you will drown as well. Keep your distance. Throw a rope, but do not let him pull you under." Now, this story is not about rivers, or drowning, or fishermen. It's about you. It's about the peculiar way we imagine ourselves as saviors, fixers, redeemers of the troubled, and how, in our beautifully naive urge to help, we often give people not our love, but our life force. And some, out of fear, confusion, or the simple chaos of their inner storms, cannot help but drag you down in their struggle to stay afloat. You see, we must be very clear about this. Compassion is not the same as martyrdom, and love is not the same as self-sacrifice. There is great confusion on this point. When I say do not help these people, I do not mean abandon humanity or become cold and indifferent. No. What I mean is this: there are those who do not truly want to rise, only to latch onto anyone who comes near. They do not seek transformation, only companionship in misery. They do not want a teacher, they want a crutch. They do not desire to change. They desire to keep their suffering polished and intact, like a cherished heirloom. And if you offer yourself your time, your breath, your stability, they will use you as a raft, not because they are cruel, but because they are drowning in their own illusions. The question is not whether they deserve help. The question is whether you must drown with them to prove you care. Let us look a little deeper. Why do we feel such compulsion to save? Why do we rush into the river without a plan, without a rope, without a sense of our own center? Because, strangely enough, the ego loves to see itself as a rescuer. It is flattered by the drama of crisis. It feels important when someone needs it, validated when someone clings. The ego says, "I will be the one to pull them from the abyss." But the deeper self, the quiet, observing presence beneath all that noise, knows something else entirely, that no one can be pulled out of their inner darkness by force. You cannot swim for another person. You cannot breathe for them. You cannot wake up on behalf of someone determined to keep dreaming the nightmare. All growth, all liberation, all awakening is an inside job. And so the wise fisherman says, do not let them pull you under, because the moment you lose your footing, your clarity, your groundedness, you are no longer able to help anyone, not them, not yourself. You become another thrashing figure in the water. Have you noticed, in your own life, people who mistake your gentleness for unlimited availability? People who ask for help but reject every suggestion? People who come to you not to heal, but to reenact the same old wounds over and over again, like actors endlessly repeating a tragic play? They are not bad. They are not evil. They are simply caught in the machinery of their own conditioning, unable to see the exit door. But you, if you are not careful, will become caught in it too. This is why forests grow in layers. Why trees maintain space around their roots. Why every creature in nature understands the need for boundaries, though it never uses the word. A tree does not apologize for the space it takes up. A river does not beg permission to flow. A mountain does not bend itself to shelter every wandering traveler. Yet each offers beauty, clarity, and refuge, simply by being what it is. You, too, must learn this. For there is a kind of help that is actually interference, a kind of kindness that secretly becomes control, a kind of sacrifice that becomes self-erasure. And the world needs no more people who have vanished in the name of appearing good. Imagine for a moment someone sinking in a pool of quicksand. If you step onto the sand yourself, both of you disappear. But if you remain on solid ground, rooted, you may offer a branch. You may throw a rope. You may call out encouragement from safety. But you cannot join them in their panic. To join another in their fear is not compassion, it is contagion. To remain yourself steady, balanced, awake is the only help that ever truly helps. And so, my friends, the great paradox is this. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is not to help, not in the way the ego wants, not in the way your guilt urges, not in the way that turns you into a sacrificial offering. Sometimes the kindest act is distance. Sometimes the clearest love is refusal. Sometimes the truest support is saying you must learn to swim, not coldly, not cruelly, but with the quiet understanding that each of us must awaken by our own light. And if you pay attention, you will notice something else. Those who truly wish to grow do not cling. They may ask, they may stumble, they may reach a trembling hand toward you, but they do not pull you down in order to rise. They do not demand that you lie beside them in the ruins just to keep them company. Instead, they use whatever support you offer as a platform from which to stand, not a tether to keep you bound. But those who are not ready, they cling with extraordinary devotion. Because clinging feels like safety when one is afraid of transformation. There is a peculiar comfort in remaining broken. It is familiar. It is predictable. Even suffering has its charm when it is known. To say, "I want help," is often only another way of saying, "I want someone to validate the prison I have built." The great misunderstanding is believing you can tear down another's prison walls for them. But if you try, they often defend the very chains they claim to hate. And then, ironically, you become the intruder, the enemy, the one who does not understand. They grip tighter, not because you are wrong, but because you threaten the identity they have grown accustomed to wearing. And so, in your kindness, you may try harder. You lean in, you console, you explain, you exhaust yourself in the hope that your effort will ignite their realization. But remember, you cannot spark a flame in wood that insists on staying wet. You cannot force a flower to bloom before spring. You cannot awaken someone who finds security in sleep. Let us pause, then, and look within ourselves. Why do we fear stepping back? Why does distance feel like betrayal? Because we confuse love with involvement. But love is not always hands-on. Love is sometimes the open palm instead of the closed fist. Love is sometimes allowing the other person the dignity of their own struggle. Have you noticed that clarity arises most often in solitude? That you find your deepest insights not when someone lectures you endlessly, but when the universe whispers quietly in the space you finally gave yourself? This is how awakening happens through space, not intrusion. And so, when a person pulls at you, clings to you, uses your energy as their life raft, the true act of compassion may be to step back far enough that they discover their own ability to float. When they cannot use you as an anchor, they must confront something far more interesting themselves. But here comes the twist, the part most people never see. Stepping back is not a judgment. It is not saying you are unworthy or you are beyond hope. It is simply acknowledging that each of us is on a path marked by both darkness and light, and no one can walk another's path for them. Think of the moon. It lights the night but never rushes forward to illuminate every corner. It shines from a distance, and because of its distance, its light is gentle. It allows shadows to exist because shadows teach shapes, depths, movement. The moon does not fix the night, it participates in it. This is how you must be. You must shine without smothering, give without draining, love without losing your center. Now some will say, but isn't that selfish? And here again we see the mind's confusion. Selfishness is grasping. Self-awareness is clarity. A tree that refuses to collapse under another's weight is not selfish, it is alive. If it yields to every pressure, if it tries to bear every burden, it eventually breaks, and then it can offer no shelter at all. This is why life insists on balance. Not the rigid balance of a scale, but the dynamic balance of a dancer. You cannot dance well if you lean too far into someone else's chaos. You stumble, you fall, you lose the rhythm. To dance with another, you must have your own center of gravity. Imagine two acrobats on a tightrope. If one loses balance and grabs onto the other, both fall. Not because either is bad, but because the rope demands individual steadiness before shared movement becomes possible. Life is like that tightrope. Everyone walks their own line. Everyone wobbles, sways, doubts. Everyone reaches a point where they believe the next step is impossible. But if they cling to you instead of finding their own equilibrium, the fall becomes mutual. And if you allow that out of guilt or obligation, you teach them not how to walk, but how to fall. True compassion is teaching balance, not dependency. And sometimes the only way to teach balance is by refusing to be held. Now, consider the strange wisdom of water. If you plunge your hand into a pool and try to scoop it upward to give it shape, it slips through your fingers. Water resists being controlled or carried. It must be met with open hands. In the same way, people must discover their own form, their own current, their own depth. You cannot give it to them. You can only meet them as they are without drowning in their tides. So when I say, do not help these people, I mean, Do not help in the way that destroys your own presence. Do not help by becoming a substitute life. Do not help by letting them attach their suffering to your spine. Instead, help by being light. Help by being clarity. Help by standing on the shore and offering direction without sacrificing your own footing. Help by living in such a way that your balance becomes a silent invitation. You too may stand, but there is something even subtler, something rarely spoken aloud. Sometimes people do not want you specifically. They want your stability. They want your calm because they do not know how to access their own. They want your clarity because their world feels blurred. They want the warmth of your presence because they are cold inside. And if you are not careful, you begin to believe it is your duty to supply these things indefinitely. Yet you cannot be someone's sun forever. If they cannot find their own source of light, your warmth only becomes a dependency. And dependency, left unchecked, becomes a kind of quiet theft of time, of energy, of soul. You will feel it when it begins. A heaviness, a subtle tightening in the chest, the sense that you are giving, but nothing is actually moving. Because there are two kinds of people in this world, those who meet your presence with their own presence, and those who meet your presence with their absence. The first kind share life with you, the second drain life from you. And the most loving thing you can do is discern the difference. Now let us look at motivation for a moment. Why do we so often feel an obligation to fix, mend, repair people who have no interest in repairing themselves? It is because we fear being seen as unkind. We fear being judged. We fear the discomfort of stepping away. But these fears are illusions. A person who is truly ready to grow will not condemn you for letting them stand on their own feet. They will respect you for it. They will thank you, perhaps not immediately, but eventually, because independence is dignity, and dignity is part of awakening. But those who depend on your energy as a substitute for their own will accuse you of abandonment. They will mistake boundaries for betrayal. They will call your clarity cruelty, not because you've harmed them, but because you've ceased to participate in their inner drama. And here lies another paradox. You are not responsible for how someone interprets your freedom. The moment you stop playing the role they cast you in, they feel the play falling apart. The script dissolves, the narrative collapses, and they panic not because they lost you, but because they lost the story. Do not be a character in someone else's tragedy. You do not need to audition for their wounds. Now, you may wonder, how do I know when I am being pulled under? How do I know when to step away? It is simple. Nature always tells the truth. You know you're being pulled under when you leave a conversation feeling smaller, dimmer, or less alive. You begin apologizing for things that are not yours. You feel guilty for taking time to breathe, rest, or simply be. You sense that your help is never enough because it was never meant to be. Your compassion turns into exhaustion instead of expansion. Your presence becomes a sponge instead of a lamp. When this happens, you must understand you are no longer dealing with a person seeking growth. You are dealing with a person seeking escape through you. And escape is never satisfied. Escape devours every rope you throw. Escape pulls with frantic hands because it believes drowning is safer than swimming. But here is the secret. Your refusal to drown may be the first moment they realize they must learn to float. When you step back, you invite them to discover their own strength, not theatrically, not harshly, but silently, the way a mountain invites a climber. Here I am. You must ascend by your own effort. I will not move for you. This is why boundaries are not walls. They are invitations. They are the structure within which true love can occur. Without them, every connection collapses into confusion. Let me tell you a small story. A monk once sat by the roadside, tending to a bowl of water. A traveler approached and asked, "Why are you polishing that bowl so carefully?" The monk replied, "Because if the bowl is cracked, what I pour into it is wasted." The traveler laughed. "What does that have to do with helping others?" The monk said, "If I pour my peace into someone who cannot hold it, both of us end up empty." There is profound truth in that simple gesture. Do not pour where there is no vessel. Do not speak where there is no ear. Do not give where there is no space to receive. Otherwise, you teach only depletion. And depletion is not a spiritual offering. It is self-neglect disguised as virtue. Now let us wander deeper into the forest of this idea. Consider that every person you meet is on a journey with its own timing. Some are in winter the cold, reflective period where nothing seems to move. Some are in autumn shedding leaves, old identities dropping away. Some are in spring, ready to grow, and some are in the storm, blown by winds they do not yet understand. If you try to force spring upon someone still living their winter, you do not help them, you confuse them, you uproot their rhythm. They cling to you because they are not ready to bud. And if you insist that they bloom, you risk tearing the seed before it has opened. Helping becomes harming. That is why patience is love. That is why stepping back is wisdom. That is why allowing is sometimes the highest form of support. The river does not push the rocks aside. It simply flows around them until eventually the rocks soften on their own. For some people, your absence is the very pressure life needs to reshape them. And when they are ready, truly ready, they will no longer cling. They will swim toward you, not to be saved, but to share the vastness of the water. This is the beauty of it all. When you no longer let others pull you under, you become weightless. You float. You become able to meet others on the surface, where movement is easy, where conversation is honest, where connection does not feel like responsibility, where love is not a rescue mission, but a dance. But before we go further, I must tell you something that is rarely admitted, even in spiritual circles. Some people need to fall, not because they deserve pain, and certainly not because the universe is punishing them, but because falling is the only teacher they will listen to. Pain, you see, is not the enemy. Pain is simply a signal that something in us refuses to change. And while you may wish to protect someone from the consequences of their own resistance, doing so robs them of the very experience that could transform them. It is like shielding a seed from the dark soil because you fear it will feel buried. But the seed must be buried. The darkness is its teacher. The pressure is its catalyst. Without the soil, the seed does not grow. People are the same. There are those who must reach the bottom of their inner river before they realize they can push off and rise. If you intercept the descent too early out of kindness, guilt, or fear, you interrupt the wisdom of their journey. And so again, do not help these people, at least not in the way you think help should look. Help them by respecting the intelligence of their path. Help them by letting them encounter themselves. I've often said that the only guru you truly need is the one inside your own skin. Because every teacher, every book, every friend is merely a mirror. And for many, the mirror they need is not your comfort, but their own consequences. Now, let us turn to another aspect of this. What happens inside you when you finally step back? When you stop leaping into the river at the first sign of a splash? At first, you may feel guilty. You may feel as if you've betrayed someone who depended on you. But look closely. Who created that dependency? You? Or the other person's fear of standing alone? Guilt often arises not from wrongdoing, but from breaking a role we were never meant to play. The rescuer role is seductive. It feels noble, dramatic, purposeful. But it is not freedom. It is bondage disguised as virtue. When you step out of that role, there is a moment of disorientation. You no longer know who you are in relation to the person who once used you as their emotional oxygen tank. And so you must rediscover yourself, not as a savior, but as a being alive, sovereign, and whole. This rediscovery is essential, because when you no longer define yourself by how much you can carry, you begin to feel something miraculous. Lightness. Lightness is the birthplace of clarity. Clarity is the birthplace of wisdom. And wisdom is the birthplace of real compassion. Not pity, not rescuing, not overextension, but compassion, the ability to love without losing yourself. And then something else happens, almost magically. Your presence becomes more powerful. When you no longer carry others, your energy is no longer diluted. It becomes concentrated. People feel this. They sense it. They respond differently. Those who once tried to pull you under realize, sometimes unconsciously, that you are no longer available as an anchor. And when you stand firm, something fascinating occurs. People reveal themselves. Those who valued you only for your usefulness drift away. Those who sought refuge in your strength look elsewhere. But those who truly see you, those who resonate with your being, not your service, step forward in an entirely new way. You discover who is aligned with your soul, not your sacrifice. Let us imagine a small lantern in a vast dark field. If you hold the lantern too low, too close, only the grass at your feet is illuminated. But if you lift it high, without clutching or straining, its light spreads. It touches everything gently, evenly, without effort. This is how your presence works when you do not exhaust it on those who refuse to rise. Now, here is the final paradox we must explore. Your refusal to help in the old way is, in fact, the greatest help you can offer. Because what you are really saying is this: I trust that you are capable of your own awakening. I refuse to treat you as broken. I believe in the intelligence of your suffering. I honor your path enough to let you walk it. You see, helping someone out of fear of what might happen to them is not love, it is anxiety. Helping someone because you cannot bear their discomfort is not compassion, it is avoidance. Helping someone because you feel needed is not generosity, it is ego. But stepping back is an act of profound respect. It says, I see your strength even if you do not. It says, I see your capacity even if you have forgotten it. It says, I will not participate in your illusion of powerlessness. Now, this stepping back does not mean closing your heart. You can still love deeply, care fully, offer presence generously, but you do so without letting yourself be swallowed. A lighthouse does not run down the shore trying to save every ship. It stands still. It shines. And by shining, it guides. Imagine if the lighthouse had legs and chased after every vessel, crying out in the night, it would topple into the sea. But by staying anchored, it becomes a beacon. You too must be anchored, rooted, still enough that your light can reach others without being extinguished. For the world needs no more exhausted helpers. It needs awakened ones. Awakened helpers understand this fundamental truth. You cannot force someone to rise, but you can refuse to sink. This is the essence of the teaching. Do not help these people not by surrendering your balance. Help them by embodying yours. Let us wander now into the heart of things, into the intimate terrain where your life meets the lives of others, where your silence becomes a listening, and your boundaries become a teaching more eloquent than any lecture you could give. For ultimately, the question is not, should I help? But rather, what part of me is doing the helping? If the helping comes from fear, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as unkind, then it is not help at all. It is a transaction. It is a performance. It is the ego preserving its own image. But if the helping comes from stillness, from that quiet place within you that does not strain or struggle, but responds the way a pond mirrors the sky, then your help becomes something quite different. It becomes a reflection rather than an intrusion. It becomes an offering rather than an obligation. And so, when you refrain from helping someone who would pull you under, you are not withdrawing love. You are withdrawing your ego's need to be important. You are clearing space for the deeper kind of love, love that liberates rather than entangles. This kind of love is spacious. It does not cling. It does not demand gratitude. It does not meddle. It simply shines, like a star that illuminates the night, without rushing down to fix every wandering traveler. Now, take a moment to feel your own life. Feel how many times you have been pulled under. Not physically, but emotionally. How many times did you sacrifice your own clarity to absorb someone else's confusion? How many times did you make yourself small to soothe another's insecurity? How many times did you drown quietly so someone else wouldn't feel alone? You may call this loyalty. You may call it compassion. But let us call it what it often is: fear of letting others face their own reflection. For there are people in this world who avoid themselves so thoroughly that they use others as mirrors, never to see themselves, but to escape themselves. And when you refuse to be that mirror, they flail, they accuse, they dramatize, they shout into the void. Yet if you hold steady, something remarkable happens. Their reflection begins to appear, not in you, but in their own awareness. Your absence becomes their teacher. And for the first time, perhaps in years, they can finally see the shape of their own suffering. You did not heal them. You did not fix them. You did not save them. You simply got out of the way so their own wisdom could speak. This is why stepping back is not abandonment. It is reverence. It honors the profound intelligence of life, the intelligence that knows precisely what each person needs to encounter in order to awaken. And sometimes what a person needs most is your refusal to be their escape route. Now, let us speak of energy for a moment. Not mystical energy, but the simple current of attention and presence that flows through you. When you give this energy to people who are not ready to use it wisely, it is like pouring water into a sieve, endlessly draining, never held, never nourishing. But when you give your energy to someone who meets you halfway, then it becomes something extraordinary. It becomes alchemy. It becomes creativity. It becomes relationship in the true sense of the word, a mutual revealing. So ask yourself, gently, does this person meet me? Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but sincerely. If the answer is no, then the most loving thing you can do is step back and allow the relationship to find its true shape, even if that shape is distance. For distance is not the opposite of connection. Distance is what gives connection its meaning. Look at the violin. If the strings lay flat against the wood, they produce no music. Tension space creates sound. So it is with people. Do not fear the space you create by stepping back. In that space, truth emerges. In that space, relationships clarify. In that space, those who once clung may discover they can stand. And once they stand, you may meet them again, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two beings walking side by side. Now, let us imagine the end of this teaching, not as a conclusion, but as a settling of dust, a softening of breath, a return to a wide, calm horizon. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself standing on a quiet shore. The waves rise and fall before you, each one a person, a story, a life. Some waves crash loudly, demanding attention. Some pull at your feet with undertow. Some reach for you, as though you alone can keep them from dissolving. And yet, you stand, stable, breathing, clear. You do not wade into every wave. You do not rush into the sea out of fear that a wave might break without you. You simply remain present, anchored in your own being. Because you have learned something essential, you cannot hold the ocean together. You cannot keep the waves from breaking. You cannot save water from itself. And in that realization, a profound peace emerges. You stop fighting the tides of others. You stop rescuing at the cost of your own breath. You stop confusing drowning with devotion. You become the shore, steadfast, open, alive. People come, people go. Some wash gently at your feet. Some crash wildly. Some leave behind driftwood or shells or nothing at all. But you remain yourself. And in that presence, something begins to shine, not for them, but through you. A quiet knowing, a gentle light, a calm so deep it needs no explanation. This is the gift you offer the world when you no longer let others pull you under. Not your sacrifice, not your suffering, not your constant rescuing, but your clarity, your balance, your being. And from that being comes the greatest teaching of all, that every person must swim by their own strength, awaken by their own insight, rise by their own willingness. You cannot do it for them, and you were never meant to. So let the waves be waves. Let people find their own breath, and let your life become a lighthouse, not a lifeboat. Still, bright, unmoving, guiding, not drowning. This is the art of not helping those who would pull you under. This is the wisdom of standing firm. This is the love that frees rather than binds. And so, my friends, breathe, stand tall, shine quietly, and let each being discover the ocean within themselves.